For each of you in the audience today, you have a speaking voice. How low should it go? Now, in Western culture, we love deep voices, and there are some incredibly famous deep voices that we all recognize.
That hairball is my son and your future king.
Clearly, that's James Earl Jones as the voice of Mufasa in The Lion King. Everyone recognizes that voice, and 2/3 of every male speaker that I know wish they had it. Here's another one.
We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect.
Yes, and that is Oprah Winfrey's voice, another deep, low voice with a clip out of the movie Selma. We all seem to love those low voices. Why is that? Well, deep voices are more powerful. Deep voices are more effective. Deep voices command respect. Right? I mean, there must be dozens of research papers, academic research papers proving this, right? I have been searching for credible academic research on this subject for over 10 years, and I have yet to find one. If you find one, please send it to me. I will be forever grateful. So in the absence of academic research, I've done some research of my own on one of the best tools for research, YouTube. I've looked at some of the big buck motivational speakers of the world. Tony Robbins, Zig Ziglar, Oprah for sure, Sue Zorman, and looked at whether they were high voices or low voices to get that kind of money when they speak. The curious thing is there's no real correlation. There's speakers all over the map in terms of what their speech voices are like. In particular, if you think a deep voice is an asset, have you ever heard Zig Ziglar?
But instead of that, what you need to do is you set your goal is identify the benefits. Why?
Identify the benefits. Why? That's way above my voice, and I don't have a low voice at all. So clearly you can make a lot of money without having a deep voice. So I also looked in the world of politics. How about a deep voice there? Is that a big benefit? I looked at the 18 last presidential elections in the United States. That's every election since 1952. YouTube's a wonderful tool. It turns out of those 18, it's about 10-8 in terms of did the higher voice candidate win or did the lower voice candidate win. Barack Obama actually won once each way. His voice was lower than McCain's and higher than Mitt Romney's. If you're looking for a politician that was successful and won a presidential election and whom we all probably know that doesn't have a James Earl Jones voice, here's an example.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Clearly, most of us have heard that speech before. Ask not what your... That's a really high voice that John Kennedy had, and he was incredibly successful with it. Well, looking in the world of Toastmasters, how about the World Championships of Public Speaking? Do the high voice speakers win or do the low voice speakers win? I went back from 2010 on, looking again at YouTube videos of championship speeches to see that. Curiously, again, it's a wash. Sometimes the high voice wins, sometimes the low voice wins, sometimes the middle voice wins. Here's an example that many of you may have heard from just a couple of years ago.
Sunit said the bridesmaids will try sweet talk. Don't give the shoes to anybody.
Don't give the shoes to anybody. That was part of Aaron Beverly's championship speech just a few years ago. Not a terribly low voice, but a very effective voice. Well, why is it that we think that a low voice is effective? It's because we're confused to think that pitch and resonance mean the same thing. And resonance is what is effective. Let me give you an example. If I introduce this speech myself this way, today's speech is about how low you should take your speaking voice. Or if I did it this way, today's speech is about how low you should take your speaking voice. Now, hopefully, the second one is clearly the stronger, more resonant one. And yet it wasn't the lowest pitched one of the two. Now, resonance is easiest to find in your own optimal natural voice range. And many of us weren't born with James Earl Jones's voice. So what happens if you speak out of range? Well, your voice gets tired. Any of you who've given a 30 or 40-minute speech know that that can be a problem. Speaking out of range also can reduce the believability of your message. Many of you may have heard what I call the used car salesman's voice. Oh, well, little lady, what's it going to take to get you into this car today? I'll bet every one of you has heard that kind of a voice. And that salesman ought to be told that no one believes that voice except maybe him, and he's convinced himself of that. So how do you find your own optimal pitch range for your voice? The easiest way that I know is a simple exercise that we're going to do now. Please stay on mute so that we don't have cacophony here. But for those of you who do active listening, that's where you are listening to someone else in a conversation and you want them to keep talking, but you don't want to just clam up because that gets creepy. You will give auditory feedback to that person. And the way many of us do is simply to go, Any of you ever do Sure you have. Well, just bounded the optimum pitch range for my voice. Now I can fake that and I can go, But if I do, naturally, the of that's about the lowest that I should speak most of the time. Now that doesn't mean that I can't speak down there for impact, but right about there is about the lowest that I should probably speak most of the time. And if I go right about there is about the highest that I should probably speak most of the time. Now, if I want to show you some excitement, I can go way up there, but I do it for effect. So try this exercise and find what is the optimum pitch range for your voice. Now, this is probably where I lose everyone in the audience because you're all doing on your own. So feel free to do this a little bit now, but try it out again after the speech to see how it works for you. Now, one last piece of research that I did. My voice teacher gave me the exercise, and she said you need to speak this way all the time, at work, with your family, and so on. But I was a little skeptical, so I did a blind taste test. Actually, maybe, is it blind or is it deaf? Well, it couldn't be deaf. It was a test. I was giving some product sales training at my company, and my company was big enough at the time that the sales force was too big for me to give that sales training all in one session. I had to give it in 2 sessions, and they broke the sales force up into 2. I gave the same identical presentation at exactly 1 p.m. on 2 consecutive days. I gave the same speech, the same material, the same vocal nuances, the same pauses, the same jokes, everything, except the first day I gave it in this voice, which was about the pitch of my original speaking voice that was actually too low. And the second time I gave it in this voice, which is actually where my optimum pitch range is. What I found was that the old way, speaking in my old too low pitch range, at about 30 minutes, I started to lose people. I could see them looking in their, at this time, daytimers, to see what else they had in their calendar. Or I could see them rustling in their papers looking for something else to do. When I used the right pitch range voice, the entire audience stayed with me the whole way. All 45 minutes, not a single person in the audience was gone. So I proved again with my own research here that speaking in that right pitch range was not only easier on my voice, it was more effective. Now, one last open question. What about women in some male-dominated environments? I will be the first to admit that there are some bigoted male managers who simply don't want to hear a woman in her natural voice range. In that case, some compromises may be required. You may have to use a little bit lower voice on occasion, maybe making that key point in front of the board of directors. But I would encourage even the women here to use their optimum pitch range most of the time, but maybe vary that pitch a little bit so they get down into that lower part of the pitch range a little bit on occasion and decide where you want to do that. Now, all of the other vocal variety stuff still applies. No monotones are allowed. You have to use the right volume. You have to use the correct diction. You have to use varying deliveries of speed. You have to use pauses. All that stuff still applies. You just apply it in the optimum pitch range for your voice. The new advantages that you'll find are that you will have a much clearer and more resonant voice, which because of that will now be more believable. You can use a deeper pitch for effect on occasion, or even a high one for effect on occasion. You will have less fatigue in your voice, and from my experience and my research, people will listen to you. Now, after the speech, I'm going to put an article in the chat which summarizes most of the material that I covered this morning. Feel free to read it and experiment on your own. Find your own optimum pitch range with that exercise. Then use that range all the time. Make it a habit. And enjoy using pitch for effects instead. And finally, enjoy people listening to you.